Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you live. We are super grateful that you chose to attend this Octane session. Today, we're going to see how Okta and AWS are working together to make it easy to use workforce identity in the cloud. I'm Unni Ravindranathan, and I'm a product manager at Okta. I'm super excited that we have Cully from the AWS Identity team join us today for this talk. Before we start, I want to start with the standard disclaimers. While all of the things that we are talking about today are available in the product today, and we are super excited to share with you, we might make a few statements that are more forward looking and may not really materialize as product features and enhancements in the future. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ron to kick this off with an introduction to AWS SSO.
Great. My name is Ron Cully, and I'm a principal product manager on AWS Single Sign-On. The last several years, we've had many mutual customers that use Okta Universal Directory with AWS. And we've had a lot of integrations that let customers federate into the individual AWS accounts. But for the past 3.5 years, what AWS has been doing is working on a new model that helps simplify how people manage access across AWS, particularly with multi-account environments. Our no-cost AWS single sign-on service gives customers a central place to federate their identities into AWS and manage access to all their AWS accounts and also to AWS SSO integrated applications. So today what we'll do is we'll walk through the work we've done together to make it easier to use Okta workforce identities across AWS. Now, to help people understand what we've done, what we'll do is we're going to start with what we've done in the past. Now, originally customers federated to Okta Universal Directory to each AWS account. And inside the account, the AWS administrator created pseudo principals called roles. Administrators could attach one or more policies to these roles, and this established the permissions that each role had to access AWS resources like EC2 instances, S3 buckets, and databases. When an Okta user signed into AWS accounts, then Okta sent AWS a SAML assertion that told AWS which roles the user can assume. When the user assumed the role, then they could access the resources based upon the policies that were attached to the role. As our customers grew their environments, they started to grow their cloud deployments, and the number of accounts and resources they had just exploded. Now, today, most of our customers have multiple accounts. And at the higher end, many of these customers have hundreds of accounts, and some may have over 1,000, and many of them have tens of thousands of resources. So in this original federation model that we had, that meant that customers had to federate to each of those accounts individually, set up the roles and policies separately in every account, and configure SAML assertions to authorize the right people to the right roles. And matching up all those connections at that scale can be kind of complex. So for a lot of our large customers, automation work is pretty important, and that can be a bit of a challenge. In addition, many of the customers have grown so much that it's difficult for them to even specify all the roles in the SAML assertions to tell AWS which roles that a user can have while still staying within the SAML assertion size constraints. So what we did is we created a new model that allows people to connect their Okta identities to a single point in AWS, and then Okta synchronizes the users into AWS. This enables the administrators to then assign access to AWS accounts and through SSO from a central point of control, and that eliminates the need to pass those assertions into AWS. Last year, we made this possible, and it was really great to work with everyone at Okta to deliver the integrations that helped customers take advantage of AWS and all the fine-grained access controls that we offer through AWS SSO. In addition to the sign-in and gaining access, we also had the synchronization capabilities, and that opens up brand new opportunities for how accounts and applications can use the group information coming from Okta for assignments and also for collaboration use cases. For example, Amazon SageMaker Studio and Amazon Honeycode integrate with AWS SSO. And so the users of those applications can work with all the same exact groups and users that were brought in for account access without having to synchronize them separately into each application. And the Okta users have an Okta single sign-on experience to both the AWS accounts and to these applications. Now, one of the key questions we've gotten often is do I have to use AWS SSO for everything if I decide to use it? What happens if I only want to use it for the applications? And the answer is no, you don't have to use SSO to replace anything you've done with your existing federation to individual accounts. So if you are happy with what's going on there and you want to continue to use that, you can. And you can install and use SSO just for the applications if that's what you want to do. Now, one of the other things that's important to understand is how AWS SSO differs from our older individual account model. And so I'm going to go into another view here to show you a little bit about the internals of how AWS SSO works. So first, rather than federating to every AWS account separately, you federate to AWS SSO at one point. And using the SCIM protocol, Okta synchronizes the users into an identity store that's inside of AWS SSO. AWS SSO then relies on the Okta for authentication and also as the source of truth for all of the user and group information. Also inside of AWS SSO is an entitlements database, and this includes permission sets and assignments. A permission set is a role definition, and it includes things like the session duration, the AWS managed policies that might be attached to it, and custom policies that you might create for your resources. The assignments link a user or a group to a permission set in an AWS account. So once you've done that assignment, once an administrator makes that assignment, AWS SSO then creates a role in the target account and sets up a trust policy so that the assigned user can assume that role. The typical process here is that an AWS SSO administrator works with the Okta administrator to set up the federation and the SCIM connection. Once that's done, an AWS SSO administrator creates the permission sets. They can then assign the users and groups that were synced in from Okta to the permission sets, and that causes SSO to create the corresponding roles in the accounts. Next, an Okta user will sign in, and when they navigate to AWS SSO, they see a portal page with a list of all of the AWS accounts and roles that the AWS SSO administrator assigned to them. So Unni, how about we show them how this all works?
Absolutely, Ron. Let's do that. So first, I wanted to start our journey in AWS here. So I have the AWS console, and within the console, I have AWS single sign-on. So that's where I am right now. The first step to connect AWS and Okta to sort of make them work together is to configure the identity source. In this example, while I'm not going to go through all of the steps here, you can change the identity source to an external provider, which I've already done. And then as a part of that, I obviously need to get some metadata from AWS SSO that I want to plug into Okta, and some metadata from Okta that I want to plug into AWS. I've done all those steps. That's not super interesting or hard. But let me show you some of the other things as well. I have enabled, like Ron was saying, SCIM is an integral part of making AWS SSO and Okta work together. So I've enabled SCIM here using this endpoint and some credentials that I've gotten from AWS SSO. Then I've also enabled this capability for attributes that can be used for access control. Don't worry about it. We'll go into detail later. So that's all the settings that I've done on the AWS side. Now, back on the Okta side, we have an application for AWS SSO that's available in the Okta integration network. So the first step to connecting both of them is to go ahead and add this application. So if you search for SSO, you'll see the application over here, and you can just add it to your organization. Now, obviously, I'm not going to do all those steps for this particular demo, but here I have an AWS SSO application that's already added and configured. To configure, if you're familiar with Okta, you just have to plug in the ACS URLs and things like that, fairly straightforward, and set up provisioning. So here I have set up provisioning. I plugged in the SCIM endpoint that I got from AWS and an API token, and I can test my connection to work. That's pretty much it, like your standard SAML and provisioning setup that I've done inside Okta. This particular application, I've decided to control who has access to this application via groups. In this example, I have a few groups that I've decided need access to AWS SSO, and I've set up these groups. So let's take a look at this group. If I go to super users, inside Okta, there's a couple of users that belong to this group, and these are the users that I've intended to give access to AWS SSO to. So let's go back to AWS and take a look at the users inside AWS SSO. You can see the two users we talked about, Albus and Minerva. They have access to AWS SSO, so everything is set up for them. And there's a bunch of other users that also have access. There are a few users though that I had previously decided to give access via assignment to a different group, that I then decided, oh no, maybe I should not be doing that. So as the admin, I revoked access, and Okta has done everything it needs to sort of synchronize this information, and access is now disabled for all these other users that who are essentially students, right? So that's the way I've set up AWS SSO. I want to show a couple more things before turning it over back to Ron. So let me first go to a user inside AWS SSO. Obviously, there are all these attributes, and the thing is, these attributes are synchronized from Okta. So let me do a quick demo of that. If I go to Okta and select Albus and edit the profile here, let me change any attribute. It doesn't matter. Let's go change the title to Principal of Hogwarts. As you can see, I'm using a Harry Potter theme just because my daughter is into Harry Potter these days. So that's my title. Let me go and save this. And just wait for a couple seconds for Okta to send this data over to AWS SSO. So I'm going to just wait for a couple seconds. And if I refresh the screen a couple times, hopefully the data is synchronized. There we go. In near real time, the data is sort of pushed over from Okta into AWS SSO using Skim, and everything is correctly populated. Now, one final thing before I turn it over to Ron is I wanted to also show you the end user experience. So bear with me as I show a capability that we'll talk about more later. In this example, there is this account and a set of permission sets. Ron talked about permission sets and how they're an integral part of AWS SSO. I have a few permission sets that I've already defined as the administrator of the organization. And for the sake of this demo, we're going to focus on just these two permission sets. What I want to do is ensure that a user who's trying to log in this case, we'll try to log in with one of the users in Okta, has these permission sets that are assigned to them as entitlements, right? So let me show you that real quick in terms of going to this account. And you'll see that, let's take a look at any of these users. Let's look at let's say Albus. Albus has access to a couple permission sets, or a couple permission sets have been assigned to Albus. Now you might be wondering how we did this. Obviously, you can do this operation inside AWS SSO by changing permission sets and removing access, but we'll see how you can do all of this, including managing entitlements, all within Okta later during this demo. So before I wrap up, let me show you the end user experience. I'm going to try and log in as Albus. So let me give my credentials over here, Albus, and give my password. Albus could have more than one SaaS application assigned to them, but in this particular example, we are just concerned about AWS SSO. So let me go and click on AWS SSO inside the Okta end user dashboard. Okta will seamlessly log you into AWS SSO. Now, for this session, as I'm connecting to AWS SSO, I have to express my intent in terms of the account and the permission set that I'm assuming for this particular session. In this example, I'm going to pick child account and one of these particular permission sets. So let's pick management console. And there you have it. Okta and AWS sort of working together to provide you seamless login experiences, SSO experiences from Okta, which is where users are getting created and maintained by an administrator of the organization, into AWS SSO, which is where a developer or someone working on DevOps, etc., is now doing their day-to-day job. With that, I'm going to turn it over back to Ron to walk us through some of the more advanced capabilities that we have built working together.
That was great, Unni. Another really cool part of this integration is the support for the AWS command line interface. Once you've configured AWS SSO with Okta, like you just showed, developers can also sign in and use their roles directly from the command line interface. When they do this, they go into the CLI, they tell it they want to use a single sign-on experience, and OAuth device authorization flow enables them to have an Okta single sign-on experience where that after they've signed in and they authorize the CLI to work using that session, it drops them right back into the CLI, and then they can just take off and work. At that point, they can use any of the accounts and roles that the user has been authorized to use, and the CLI process manages getting all the temporary credentials they need automatically. So it really saves the developers a lot of time getting into the system. Now, another thing that we've done is we've done a lot of work around attribute-based access control. And to understand what ABAC is all about, I'm going to take a moment here and talk about how role-based access control works as a comparison, because role-based access control is what most of the customers have been using up to now. So customers often have thousands of resources in AWS that are owned by different teams. And traditionally, what they did is they would create different teams like the red team, the green team, and the blue team. And each team had its own set of resources like EC2 instances and databases. To give the right people access, what they would do is they would create a set of roles in each account for each team. And in many cases, the roles were basically identical for the different teams, except that the resources they referenced in the roles were different. So if you might have like 1,000 teams with 1,000 different collections of resources, that can result in a lot of roles and a lot of policies, and you essentially are duplicating everything you're doing except for referencing a different resource inside of each of the policies. So to simplify that, what we did is created attribute-based access control. In attribute-based access control, you can have one set of roles and policies regardless of how many teams you have. To make sure that people can access only their team's resources, what you do is you tag the resources to indicate which team owns those resources. You also tag the users with their team. So when a user assumes a role, AWS matches up the user's tag with the resources tag, and if those match, then the user gets access to the resource based upon the permissions that the policy grants. For example, when people from the red team assume a role, they'll get access to the resources that are all tagged red. But when people from the blue team assume the same exact role, they'll get access only to the resources tagged blue. So instead of having teams or tens or hundreds or thousands of roles, you can have a few roles and policies that give people access to the right things just by adding tags to the resources and having Okta send a corresponding attribute for their users. If one team has more resources, they just tag them and to grant access rather than updating the policies to add in those additional resources. And if you added a purple team tomorrow, then you just tag the people and the resources accordingly, and they just make sure that the purple team members all have access to the same roles. Now, to make this work, there are a couple of different ways of doing this. One is that Okta can send attributes directly from, as part of a SAML assertion, to AWS, and then AWS will process that tag for the user in its policy evaluation. And an alternative way of doing that, if you want to do that, is you can go into AWS SSO and select the attributes that you want to use for ABAC. And what AWS SSO will do is grab that attribute for the user, and that attribute will have been synced in from Okta. So either way, the attribute's coming from Okta. It's just whether or not AWS SSO picks it up out of its identity store or whether Okta sends that dynamically. Dynamic attributes can often be a nice way to go if you have some really sophisticated things that you want to express before giving access, other than just basic department number or something like that. If we step back here for a minute and we think about what we're really doing between AWS and Okta, is we're really managing the life cycle of workforce users as they go through the system. So you have the identity sources, typically some kind of an HR system where people join into the environment. And then once they're in there, we need to be able to assign resources to those people based upon what their role is. And then they might move between different departments. And as they move and change within the organization, the access to the things they want to have will evolve over time. And what we want to be able to do is have the context of the user be able to trigger things to handle situations, whether they're being added as a new user, whether they're moving, or whether they're leaving the organization and maybe have to do some cleanup after the fact to get rid of access that might be established in different systems. Now, what all this means is that with Okta, what you want to be able to do is say, when this event happens, and if this condition exists, then take this action and then do another action. So I might say a new user comes on, they've joined into a new department, And because of the department they're in, I want to maybe give them access to Salesforce and give them access to Slack. Or maybe in the case of AWS, I might want to say, well, they've joined this department. I want to give them access to these databases. And so what we did is we've worked together with Okta to integrate this model into AWS SSO. And the way that we did this is by adding in new APIs to AWS SSO for the entitlements database. So with this model now, Okta, in addition to being able to manage the authentication and the synchronization of users into AWS for access into accounts, Okta can also now manage the actual entitlements. So you might want to create the permission sets in AWS SSO. Maybe you do that through CloudFormation stack sets or other tools you might want to use. But regardless, now you can take advantage of the workflow management that Okta has to assign the permission sets to the users in the groups based upon actions that you process through Okta's workflow system. So we're really super excited to announce this new work. This has never been done before with anybody else. It allows you to use the Okta workflow system to process things in the normal workflow of joiner, mover, and leavers, and have them connect to different permission sets based upon the conditions of that environment. So I'm going to turn it over to Unni here. And Unni, you want to take them through a tour of how this all works?
Absolutely. Let's do that. So just to recap then, where we left off, we had connected AWS and SSO together, and we were sort of like, we had done this demo where we were sort of adding users to an organization or a group, and then attributes were getting synchronized and so on and so forth. At that time, we had sort of hand waved around how exactly are permissions assigned and managed to these various users. So let's take a look at that. Over here with Okta Workflows, which is sort of our low-code, no-code programming environment, we have a set of flows that we have pre-canned that make it really easy for you to manage these entitlements. Obviously, we have a lot of these flows that you can sort of get started with to help you kickstart your integration. But in this example, I'm just going to use a flow that I've already created. Now, what this flow really does, once it loads, is that it takes a look at a table that we are holding inside Okta Workflows as our source of truth. Let's take a look at that table first. And in this table, as you can see here, there's a bunch of accounts. I'm sorry about this small font here. There's a bunch of accounts that I've decided to add to this table. Now you can have any number of these accounts, all separated by a comma, as well as a bunch of permissions that I'm adding to this table as well. Again, you can have any number of these permissions. You can think of these accounts and permissions as sort of a combination of things where the user needs to express the account that they are. Remember how we did that demo where they're trying to log in and they have to first select the account, and they have to pick a permission set that they're assuming for that particular session. That's what we are doing here. We are sort of controlling who gets access to what accounts and what permission sets, and that's all controlled with Okta groups. So what this column is all about is it's saying that any user that is a part of this group gets access to or gets the chance to assume a particular permission set in the context of these accounts when they are logging into AWS SSO, right? So that's this table here. And all this workflow is doing, let me go back to the workflow, is that it's processing that table. It's saying that whenever a particular user is added to a group, then do something. And in that particular case, it's all about searching the table, finding the right permission sets and accounts, and then ultimately calling the AWS APIs that Ron was talking about to manipulate that entitlement against that particular user. In this case, AWS calls them principals. So it's essentially assigning accounts and permission sets as entitlements to that particular principal. So let me quickly show that as well. If I go back to my templates, this is the actual child flow that gets called, which really calls the AWS APIs using the workflows connector that Ron was just talking about. So, and this workflows connector has a lot of different capabilities. You can add entitlements, remove all entitlements for a user, etc. So that's really what's going on behind the scenes. Let's take a quick look at how all this works in action. So over here in AWS SSO, let's take any user. Let's take this user over here, Minerva, and Minerva has access to view only access and administrator access. So these are the permission sets that Minerva was already entitled to. Now I want to sort of give Minerva access to ECR access, this particular new permission set that Minerva doesn't have access to. All I need to do is go back to Okta, and what I've done is I've set it up such that any users that are, let me go back to the table here. What I've done is that any users that are a part of the magic group or the potions group, that's really the permission set that they are getting assigned to, that ECR access permission set, right? So all I need to do is make sure that Minerva is a part of either one of these groups. It doesn't really matter which group. So in this case, let's pick magic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the magic group, and using familiar Okta gestures, just manage this particular group to add Minerva into this group, right? So let's do that and save. Now back over in Okta workflows, let's see what's happening. So first and foremost, what's going to happen is that Okta is going to figure out that Minerva was added to a group and is going to kick off the flow to add that particular entitlement that we decided should go to users in the magic group inside Okta on the AWS side. So let's take a look at that. If I look at the flow history here, which is a nifty debugging tool, I can see what's going on. You can see in this example, Minerva is the user that's getting processed, and Minerva is getting added to the Hogwarts teachers magic group. And really what's going on behind the scenes is that Okta is calling AWS, which is the child flow that does actually call the AWS APIs, and it's calling this AWS API right here at with that particular principal ID, account ID, etc., so that the user can then get that particular permission set on the AWS SSO side. So let's go take a look at what really happened. So you can see, I've not refreshed my screen just yet. Minerva has only access to these two permission sets, but as soon as I refresh my screen, and if everything is going to work fine, uh, Minerva now is now entitled, let's call it that, this additional permission set that Minerva, whenever they decide to log in, they can just choose to use any one of these permission sets now going forward, right? Now let's fast forward a little bit, and let's imagine that I made a mistake, or Minerva were changing departments and so on and so forth, like Ron described. My goal is to make sure that Minerva doesn't have access to this particular permission set. Again, very simple. All I need to do is go back to my group, remove Minerva from this group, and save. Again, exactly the same things are going to happen behind the scenes. Now, in this particular case, if I go back to my workflows and look at the workflow for remove entitlements, that's really what's happening, right? There is a remove gesture that is happening, and the user is getting removed from that particular permission set. And when that all finishes executing, if I go back on the AWS SSO side and refresh a couple times, I may just have to wait for a minute or so. You will see that Minerva is no longer available as a user in this particular list, because Minerva has lost access to all of their permissions. Now, when I was actually creating this demo, I made a mistake of removing all entitlements from Minerva. But what I really want to do is just remove ECR access. I can totally do that by making sure that I just remove that one permission versus all permissions that are assigned to Minerva. So to summarize, what we have seen thus far is that using Okta workflows, we are able to automate those joiner, mover, and leaver scenarios. In this example, Minerva joined a particular group, got access to a particular set of permissions, and then when Minerva left, all those permissions were revoked, all in a very seamless way. Imagine that the user is created in a Workday or any other HR system. All of this can be fully automated inside Okta. Working together with AWS SSO, we have enabled this connector that really helps you automate all these various joiner, mover, and leaver scenarios. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ron to wrap up this demo and this talk.
Thanks a lot, Unni. That was really awesome. So what that means now is that customers have this new way of automating the process of assigning that's kicked off all the way through the entire workflow system through Okta, starting clear back from the HR system all the way in through all of the workflow system of Okta. That's really terrific. So I want to take a moment here and kind of recap what we've seen today. The first thing I want people to understand is that you can now have this really great central account and application access management by integrating Okta with AWS SSO. You get this easy experience of setting up SAML and SCIM integrations, and that allows, once you've done that, it allows you to use the Okta workforce identities across a whole number of AWS use cases. You get to take advantage of the automated joiner, mover, leaver scenarios within the lifecycle management of Okta. You can leverage the Okta identity engine capabilities, including the seamless passwordless access with FastPass. You can authenticate into AWS SSO using Okta as your identity provider. And then once you've done that, you can be using AWS SSO's fine-grained access controls to gain access to all of the resources based upon things that are coming out of Okta. This also gives you really flexible ways to control access, either using AWS SSO or Okta or whatever combination makes sense to you. So AWS SSO brings to you this fine-grained multi-account access management framework, and you can choose to drive that either through administration actions in AWS SSO, or you can go into Okta and do all those. So as an example, if you're using ABAC, you could go into SSO and say, well, let's use this attribute that comes in from Okta and have AWS SSO attach that attribute as a tag for ABAC for all users. Alternatively, you could not use that, and you could say, let's go over to Okta and configure it so that it passes through a dynamic attribute for the user that we then pass through for processing in the ABAC system for AWS access. Another flexibility is whether or not you manage the assignments of the permission sets in the AWS side, or if you manage that inside of Okta. And historically, people have gone and used the AWS console and got into the SSO side to do that permission set management. But now you have this really great new way with the new feature from Okta to use the workflow system to do those assignments dynamically as people join, move, or leave your environment. So I think that kind of recaps everything. Unni, did you have anything you want to add?
No, Ron, that was fantastic. It was great to see our two teams work together and bring all of these innovations to customers so they could really manage their workforce identities in a seamless way. Working together, across Okta and AWS SSO. So that's really exciting.
Great. Okay, well, if you're interested to get more information, here's a couple of links for you. If you want to learn more about AWS Single Sign-On, you can go to our documentation page that's listed here on the screen. If you want to learn how to integrate Okta with AWS Single Sign-On, there's another link here for that. And then if you want to try out this new workflow connector and see how you can do dynamic assignments of permission sets to users based upon the workflow system, then there's a link there as well. So Unni, I want to thank you for having me as a guest in this session. It was really great to show everybody what we've been working on the last couple of years.